Shashank, we can't hear you, I guess.
Hello.
Hi, Trisha. How are you doing?
How are you?
Oh, any better now?
Oh, yeah. We can hear you now.
Okay.
Carry on, please.
Sorry about that. So, good morning, everyone here in the US, and good evening to the ones in India. I'm Shashank Neti, the Secretary of the Indian Student Association here at the University of Michigan Ann Arbor. We have with us here today Trisha Chaparala from the Oklahoma State University who will be presenting this today. Among the audience are the students from the University of Michigan, the Michigan State University, and the fresh admits. We know that these are very turbulent times, and all of us have many different questions regarding the immigration and tax issues, and we hope to iron a few of them out today. Firstly, we would like to thank Bharatiyam USA for helping us host this wonderful session, which I'm sure would be very helpful to everyone who is a part of this. And of course, to Trisha ji, who's taking a lot of time and effort to do this for the greater good. Before we begin, a brief introduction about Trisha Chaparala. She serves as the International Tax Coordinator at the Oklahoma State University. She has worked in the field of international education for the past 13 years in different capacities, with experience in conversational English, immigration advising for F1 and G1 students, OPT and CPT advising, employment issues for the faculty and staff, international student-athlete advising, international programming, and non-resident alien tax issues. He also oversees all the international employment issues and analyzes all payments made to the international individuals and entities for tax implications. She has undergraduate degrees in English and finance and a master's degree in international studies. We once again would like to thank her for taking time to do this. So the agenda for today would mostly be this way. Trisha ji will initially present a PPT, and then after that, we would take some questions from the audience and wrap things up as soon as possible. Over to you, ma'am.
Hi. Thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you for the invitation to share some information today. So, and thank you to Bharatiyam for inviting me to join in this organization and all the good works to help our Indian community across the country. So today I thought I would do some updates on some of the immigration changes, some updates to some of the tax changes, and it's all going to be in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, because we have had several changes and the situation is very fluid as well. So anything I say today can always change tomorrow. So we want to make sure we follow up with all of the changing guidelines and regulations. Okay, so I'm going to try to share my screen to show you my PowerPoint. Oh, let's see. Can you guys see this?
No.
Not really.
No.
Okay, I think it's telling me the host has prevented me from sharing my screen.
Oh, okay. So Bharatiyam would have to do that.
Let me see. So I haven't got any request as such. Let me just quickly ask her.
Make her the host.
It says host disabled participant screen sharing. So
just give me a minute.
Yeah, sure.
Trisha, can you request it again?
Oh, it still says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Anshul, try making her a co-host or something like that.
Yeah, he's working on that, I guess. He's the host, so only he can do it. Trisha, you're the co-host now, so
Okay.
try it again, please.
Let me try it again.
Yes.
Okay. Can you see?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to frame all of the information in light of the pandemic and what's going on and the changes that we've seen. So this will primarily deal with F1 status students. So F1 is the student status that our international students come here on. And we'll start by kind of recapping what have we seen, what have we gone through in the last few months. The pandemic really started to hit by about mid-March, where we saw many universities went from in-person face-to-face classes to primarily online. For the first time ever since I've worked in international education, immigration allowed international students to be enrolled in all online coursework. Next, we saw social distancing, we saw campuses shutting down, dorms were being vacated, campuses became empty. We see some students that decided to leave the United States, some decided to leave the location of their university, people spreading throughout the country, some able to go home. Embassies closed across the world. And embassies are still closed currently all across the world. We're hoping those will start to open up later this summer, but we don't really have definitive dates at the moment. And then we started seeing travel bans from other countries where they have stopped international travel. And then even in the US, President Trump has imposed temporary travel bans, with the most recent being from Brazil. Okay, so a lot of our students, they were faced with the dilemma of, what do I do? Do I stay here? Do I go home? Do I leave the country? And this brought about a lot of questions. How will this impact my OPT? How will this impact CPT? As you know, as an international student, you must have at least 2 semesters worth of classes in the US before you qualify for an OPT or a CPT. So now some students that maybe arrived in the spring wonder, do I go home? And if I do, will I lose those 2 semesters and no longer qualify? So this is an area that immigration has provided guidance, and they have told us that if you did go home for the spring, if your university shifted to online, you will still qualify for that 2 semester requirement for your OPT and CPT. That's been a very frequent question I've had. So that's good news from immigration. Another thing is, a lot of people were trying to leave or maybe still trying to leave. And you have to have your I-20 signed before you leave. Well, how do you do that if your office is closed, no one's available for signatures? So another thing that immigration has done to make things easier is, for the first time, they have allowed electronic signatures or digital signatures. So if you are someone that still needs to travel home, you can contact your international office. They could actually email you an I-20 with a signature, and that would be acceptable for travel. Contact your international office. They could the other issue you want to look at if you're planning to travel is, will you be subject to a quarantine when you return home? You would need to check with your government, check with the airline. There are many rules. I believe in India, is it a 2-week quarantine period if you're able to even get there. the other issue with travel is the embassies are closed everywhere, the US embassies. So let's say your visa has expired, you may or may not be able to have that visa renewed. So let's say you go home for the summer. I have a student I'm working with, his visa expires August 1st. He's stuck at home and he doesn't know if he'll get a flight home before August 1st. He also doesn't know if he'll get that visa renewed. So these are things to really think about before you leave. This is a time where if you leave, you have to be prepared that you either may not be able to come back or you may have significant delays coming back. Also, flights back to India are a little complicated. You've probably heard of the initiative that the Indian government has taken to get people home. There's a registration process through the Indian embassy, but it's very limited. So not everyone that registers will even be given that opportunity. And then I believe there's still a 2-week quarantine period once you arrive back. Okay, there have been some changes to tax issues in the US. So the typical filing deadline is April 15th. However, April 15th was in the middle of the pandemic, and so the deadline has been extended to July 15th, 2020. That deadline, it just means you have to have mailed your tax return by that date. They don't have to receive it. It just needs a postmark date. If you are in a state, Michigan has state taxes. Most state deadlines have also been extended. In Oklahoma, it's been extended to July 15th as well. So you'd want to check when your Michigan deadline would be. Many are July 15th as well. Another change is scholarships. They are typically considered taxable for non-resident aliens. If you have a scholarship that exceeds tuition and required fees, then the amount that exceeds the tuition and fees, that is taxable by 14%. If your scholarship doesn't exceed tuition and fees, then it's not a taxable scholarship. So one of the changes we've seen is if you get a scholarship that is considered an emergency relief scholarship, let's say your university is giving you a scholarship for housing or food, that is actually not considered taxable. Whenever a national emergency is declared, emergency relief money is not taxable in the US. At my institution at Oklahoma State University, we are awarding emergency relief money to international students. I don't know if your universities are. It's worth looking into if they are. And I would maybe start with asking your international office or maybe even contacting your student affairs department, and they would be able to let you know. Okay, with tax, the other issue is there are 2 categories of international students. There are the non-resident aliens for tax purposes and the resident aliens for tax purposes. Now with tax, the term non-resident and resident, they don't mean the same as they do for immigration purposes. So typically you are considered a non-resident alien for tax purposes for the first 5 years in the US. And after that period, just for tax purposes, you become a resident. So most of our new international students, almost all of them are going to fall into the non-resident alien category. If you're someone that's doing a PhD, then it's very likely you would eventually become a resident for tax purposes. But those of you that are here for the first time, doing your master's, you're most likely in that non-resident category. So there's different types of tax returns. If you're the non-resident, you file the non-resident tax return, which is the 1040 NR, or sometimes the 1040 NR-EZ. Residents have a different tax return that they do. It's called the 1040. And so many institutions, they might offer a tax prep service. Maybe you've heard of something like Sprintax. Do you guys do Sprintax or Glacier? those are really the only companies that can prepare the non-resident tax return. So one of the issues I've seen at my institution is sometimes people will just use something like TurboTax or H&R Block or something that they see a commercial for, or maybe their American roommate did their taxes that way. Now, if you're a non-resident alien, that's actually considered tax fraud, and you should not be using that service. So there is a process to correct that. And what you would do is file an amended tax return. And if you use a company like Tax or Glacier, they can do that for you. So the reason this started coming up so much all across the country is there was something called the economic stimulus check that went out. So Congress agreed that all resident taxpayers would be eligible for a check. If you're a single person, that check was for $1,200. If you're married, you have children, the amount increases. So there were a lot of international students across the country that started getting that money. It showed up directly in the bank account as a direct deposit. A few people got a paper check. However, the rules from Congress state that non-resident aliens, they're not eligible for that money. So if you're somebody that got that money, then chances are you did file incorrectly as a resident. And there's a process to return that money. And at the end, I have a link to the IRS website with instructions on how to do that. I just really want to bring attention to taxes and filing correctly, because if someone's a non-resident alien and they file as a resident alien, they use something like TurboTax, it's actually classified as tax fraud. And it's something that's so significant that you could be denied a future immigration benefit. For example, if you apply for an H-1B in the future, you apply for a green card, it's something that could end up getting denied if it's proven that you have filed incorrectly. So I think often this is an area that's not really considered, and there aren't generally repercussions at the moment, but it is something that can come back and really hurt an international student. So just be aware, if your university has a tax prep software like Glacier, Tax, please use that. That's the safest and best option to use. If your university does not offer something like that, you can always find Glacier Tax Prep online or Tax and just pay for it on your own. Okay, next I'm going to go over a few employment issues. With universities shutting down and people working from home, people leaving the location of their university, some universities allowed students to continue working and to continue working remotely. If you're able to work from home and you could continue doing so, most universities were okay with that. You'd want to check with what your specific university allows. At my institution, we allowed people to work from anywhere in the US. However, we did not allow employment from out of the country. And so the reason being for that is if somebody is working in their home country, there are a lot of tax and employment laws that we have to apply for that country. So I would caution you, if you are someone that is able to work from home and you do leave the country or leave the state, you want to communicate that with your supervisor, just so they know. Sometimes the tax implications can be different working from a different state or a different country. Okay, another frequent question I've been asked is, am I allowed to receive unemployment benefits? So a lot of states, I would think all states, offer unemployment benefits to those who are out of work. And the question is that okay for an international student? And so that is going to vary by state. There are some states that will allow it. I think, California is one of those states that allows it. There's certain states that say, yes, you can collect this money. And then there's other states that don't allow it. So I'm not sure on Michigan. You'd have to maybe check with maybe your international office, maybe your HR office. But I would caution you before you accept any aid from your state that you find out if it's allowed. There is this issue called public charge. I don't know if you've heard of this, but this is something that President Trump has imposed, that if you were to accept money and become a public charge, accept federal aid, that you will have a future green card denied if you apply for one. So you want to be very careful about the money that you're accepting because you don't want to hurt your immigration record in the future. Okay, emergency aid, like I said, some universities are giving out emergency aid through private donors. You might check with your university, check with your student affairs department, international office, even the scholarship office to see if they have any of that aid available. Sometimes schools have that aid available and you just don't know that it's there. So find out if there is anything. Under the CARES Act, which was passed by Congress to provide relief, there was funding set aside for universities. However, that funding from the government, you are not eligible for as an international student. So anything coming under the CARES Act, you would not qualify for. Okay, OPT. OPT is such an important topic that's on everybody's mind right now. And there have been some changes with OPT. We expect even more changes in the future. And one of the questions I've been getting frequently is, can I apply for OPT from out of the country? So we had some students at my school, it was their last semester, they decided to go back home to their home country. Now they're graduating in May and they would like to do OPT. Now, unfortunately, that regulation has not changed. If you are currently outside of the US, you cannot file an OPT application. That's something that you're still going to need to be in the US to file. Immigration says they are looking at that issue and they may consider changing it, but at the time it stands that you cannot apply from out of the country. There is that 2-semester in-country requirement that we talked about. You'd have to complete 2 consecutive semesters in the US to qualify for OPT. So let's say you are one of those people that maybe you went home for the spring and your CVIS record, your immigration record, or your I-20 stayed active. And then you came back for the fall for in-person classes. And then let's say you're a December fall graduate. In that case, you would qualify for your OPT because that spring, even though you may have gone home, that is considered in-person for immigration purposes. And it would fulfill that in-person OPT or CPT requirement. Okay, also under OPT, the OPT rule has been you must be employed at least 20 hours a week to be considered full-time on OPT and to not accrue unemployment. That is one area that immigration has relaxed. You can be working under 20 hours and still maintain that full-time. Okay, another thing I've seen recently with OPT is an increase in RFEs. So what is an RFE? An RFE is when you apply for OPT and you get a letter back from immigration that is a request for more evidence. They're going to come back and ask you some questions before they either approve or deny your OPT. In my school, I've been seeing more of these lately and some very lengthy RFEs. Sometimes these RFEs can be up to 10 pages of evidence that's requested. OPT is something that is being scrutinized much more, and there's a lot of pressure from Congress to scrutinize OPT. There are senators that are saying there's a lot of fraud involved in OPT. There are a lot of fake companies or fake institutions. So they're starting to ask more questions. So, for example, this week I saw an RFE at my school for someone applying for OPT. They asked the student to submit a syllabus for every course she took. They asked her to provide proof of every payment she made to her tuition. They asked her for all sorts of just crazy things that would never be asked for. But unfortunately, we're starting to see more of that. So what I would advise you to do is to keep copies of everything. Go ahead and keep copies of all the syllabus that you get for your classes. That's something that seems to be asked more and more. Keep copies of all your I-20s that you have. Keep copies of your transcript. Keep copies of your tax returns. These are all examples of things that are being asked for. And so it's a lot easier if you have a really good file and record of all of your information. So if you're asked for it, you have it available and you don't have to go looking for it. Under President Trump's administration, this is a very challenging time to be an international student, and you want to make sure everything in your record is clean, that you have copies of everything, and you really do that to protect yourself. Another thing we've heard in the last few weeks is the rumor that OPT could be eliminated. This is something that could happen even in the next week or so. There's a group of senators, Republican senators, that are calling for the end of OPT, saying that OPT takes away American jobs. And so there's a push to either, I think temporarily, at least for the next year, end OPT. Now, we don't know if that will happen, how that will happen. We don't have any details at this time. All we've seen is a letter from some senators, Senator Cruz, Senator Grassley, a couple other very conservative senators have just posed a letter. And so it could be that Trump signs an executive order and it goes away. It could be that there are just changes made to it. It could be that it's taken away and then the courts sue to bring it back. So there's really a lot we don't know. But it is something that's in the talks. It's something you're going to want to watch the news to keep up with and follow closely. Okay, so then what's next? Like I said, this is a really fluid situation. Things are changing every day. Every day I read immigration updates. Yesterday we just had an executive order where President Trump has said he will no longer allow graduate students from China with any connections to the military to study in the US. That was a big change that came out yesterday. We don't know all the details yet, but things are coming out daily. Things are changing daily. It's also an election year, and typically in an election year, there will be a lot of changes to immigration. But it can also be a good thing because depending on the election, things can change. We could have a completely different president with a completely different immigration agenda. So we don't really know. There's a lot of unknowns at the time. There could be more travel bans. There are currently travel bans from several locations that are considered high corona case locations. Recently, Brazil was added to that list. So we could see that changing as well. We can see more executive orders by President Trump, and those can just come overnight. Fall classes, we're not sure. Most universities are saying they will meet in person for fall. They will have face-to-face classes. My campus is saying we will meet face-to-face. What have your schools said? Are you guys going back to face-to-face, or are you still doing online for the fall? I guess I have to unmute you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they haven't taken any concrete decisions yet, but I think they're cautiously positive to reopen the schools this fall. But as of now, I think they are sticking only to the online delivery.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so like I said, we're not really sure where we're at right now. Fall classes, if you're a current student in the US and if the fall goes online, then you will be allowed to continue here. Your school has to update SEVP. SEVP is a Student Exchange and Visitor Program, CVIS basically. They have to inform them that you've gone online, and then you would be allowed to continue with online classes. If your university goes back to face-to-face classes, then you won't have that option to go home or to be in online classes. So it's really going to depend on what your university does. So my university is going back to face-to-face. So if we have students that want to do online from somewhere else, we would have to terminate their CVIS records. And that could impact their OPT, their CPT. And so you want to just keep all of those things in mind. Also, new students, we have to be meeting in face-to-face classes for new students to be able to arrive for the fall. If classes are online at your institution, they will not be allowed to arrive. They will not be allowed to have an I-20 to allow them to come here if classes are online for the fall. So that is something we really have to watch. Also, for our new students, the embassies are still closed, so we're still waiting to see when those will reopen, when we can start getting visa appointments, and how quickly that process will move. So hopefully that will start moving as the summer goes on and we can get back to normal. But once again, there's a lot of unknowns in that area. Another thing to be aware of, there are many scams right now because of the pandemic. The scams have increased. The scams have been pretty bad for several years, but I've just noticed, at least at my university, an increase. Just this week, I had at least one student ended up paying about $2,000 because he was told that someone from ICE was going to pick him up. And the scams are becoming much more believable. As you've probably received these calls, many of you, the number on the phone, it may match a number for an agency. They may sound pretty believable with what they say. They may know things about you. They may know your visa type or what country you're from. But, just as a reminder, federal agencies will never call you on the phone. Immigration or the IRS, they will never call you. And if for some reason they did contact you, it's typically by mail. If it's an immigration issue, they're going to contact your university also. They're not just going to call you and threaten to deport you. That's not how it works. They're also never allowed to ask for money. So if anyone's asking you for money, for gift cards, then, that's not legitimate. Just hang up on those people. Okay, and then finally, like I said, the situation is so fluid. We're still hearing different updates. The rules are still changing every day. Different allowances are being made. So we really need to follow up with the news and make sure you're getting your information from good sources. There's a lot of information online that's not accurate. Or, sometimes you have friends that are well-intending, but they may not have the most accurate information. So just make sure you're really careful about the sources that you're looking to for information. Always rely on your international student office. They're going to be the people that really know you well. They know the rules. They have a reason to look out for you. So don't be afraid to talk to them. They're here to help you. Also, they know your institution and your own institution rules and resources. So always reach out to them. And then I just have some resources that are really good, legitimate resources. The first one was the IRS site, where if you need to return that stimulus check, how to do that. There are very specific instructions there. And then the next one, the ice.gov. This is probably the best source of information, and it gets updated weekly. And this is where you're going to see all of the different changes that apply to OPT, to CPT, to being a student in the US. So really check out the second one here. This is going to probably answer almost everything you need to know. This is what the universities are reading to keep up. Then obviously the Indian Embassy in the US, that's where you can find information on the program to return to India. If you want to register for that, you can find that there. I'm sure you guys are aware of that. The travel.state.gov, that's the Department of State. That's going to relate to the embassies, visa issuance. You might be able to see when they start scheduling appointments. Whitehouse.gov, that's obviously the US government, the White House. Any of the updates will be there. Anything related to an executive order will be on that site. And then the last one is the Study in the States. That's a really great website for F1 students. You can find all of the regulations that you need, all of the changes, lots of really great resources. So I would really encourage you to look into all of these resources and to really get your information from places like this, because you know you can trust what they have. So those are my updates in regards to the pandemic. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer those questions.
Yeah, one question I thought I'd just reiterate is, if the students are taking their first semester online from India, if their college has gone online, will that be counted as one of the 2 consecutive semesters in the US for them to be eligible for CPT?
Well, CPT, is this a grad student or an undergrad student?
I'm guessing it's a grad student, but either way.
Okay, so with grad students, there is more flexibility for CPT. So there is that 2-semester requirement. The way that requirement stands right now is you have to have an active record, an active I-20 for 2 semesters. So if you're starting your first semester from home, then you don't have an active I-20. So as of now, that would not necessarily count. However, it is an area immigration is looking at, and they're considering changing. But also with grad students, the regulations say there is flexibility. So if you're in a program that requires an internship, they can still allow you to go ahead and do that CPT even before meeting that requirement. So, you know, certain programs like at my institution, the business analytics or the MIS, those require multiple internships. So in those cases, they can actually break that 2-semester rule if it's part of their school curriculum.
And another question that we had come across is from a person who has worked in India before coming here for his or her graduate studies, and then he's also working here. So I remember while filing the tax returns, there is one question where we have to disclose any revenue we had in India. So how do we go about that? Do we does that matter, or how should we attack it?
So if you're classified as a non-resident alien for tax purposes, if you've been in the US less than 5 years, you actually don't report any income from India. You're only reporting your US income. Now, if you go to the category of resident alien for tax purposes. If you're here more than 5 years, in that situation, you would report income from India.
Okay. And just as an extension to that, if someone has worked in different states here in the United States in one financial year, do they have to file for two different state taxes, or is it just one, or how does it work?
Right, that's a good question. So they'd report all the income on the federal tax return, and then they would need to do a state tax return. There are 7 states in the US that don't have the state tax return requirement. So if they're one of those 7, like, Texas, Florida, Nevada, there's a few more, those you won't do a state tax return. But if you're from a state that does require it, yes, you would do another state tax return. And Sprintax is a company that can do that.
Okay. And the next question we have is, if someone's joining for the studies in spring 21, would they be allowed to do an internship in summer 21?
Okay, so they're starting in spring and they want internship in summer. So typically no, unless they're from one of those programs that require multiple internships. So some programs, they may require many hours of an internship. And in those cases, they may have to do it before that 2-semester rule.
And another question we have is, does one need to file the tax return for 2019 if they started working from Feb to 2020?
No. So when you file, the tax returns we're filing right now are for the prior year, for 2019. So it's only if you had income in 2019. So if your income started in 2020, then no, there's no filing requirement yet. It will be next year.
Okay. And this is one question I had personally, as well as someone also has asked that. If we have any revenue from stocks, how do we disclose that, or how do we file for that separately?
Right. So you would get a tax document called a 1099 if you've invested in stocks. So you want to check with that company. A lot of my students, they use Robinhood or maybe Fidelity or Charles Schwab. There's a lot of different venues for that.
Yeah.
So you want to get that tax document called the 1099, and then you will include that income on your tax return. If you use something like Glacier or Sprintax, there will be an area where you can add that information.
Okay. And the next one we have is, the University of Michigan has told me that they're looking at ways in which they can help me start my PhD if I'm unable to arrive in the US by the start of fall 2020. What can I do to prepare for it? And do I need a US bank account or an NRO/NRE Indian bank account?
So are they saying they will pay you from abroad, or will you just be starting school? I don't know whose question this is.
Yeah, Anmol, you can probably unmute, and then you can ask your question directly.
Hi, Ms. Trisha. Thank you for organizing, for being here. So they have told me that they're trying to figure out how it would work, and they're still looking at different options. They haven't given any concrete answers to that. I did ask them specifically about how funding would work. So at first I needed approval from my professor, and she said she's willing to fund me, but the department and the school is looking at how that would work out, and they haven't given any clarity on that.
Right. Okay. So that's something that is probably the Human Resources Department that needs to decide. At my institution, we're not able to do that because we would have to follow all of the tax laws and employment laws for that country. So you want to wait and follow up with them to see if it's something that they would allow. The payments might be a little difficult because they probably wouldn't mail you a check. Even if they mailed you a US check, it's pretty useless abroad. Some banks, they may let you open a bank account, like a Chase Bank or certain US-based banks. I've seen where they've let international people open an account and then they could do direct deposits that way. So you might look into that as well. But for you, the biggest issue is going to be if they even allow it.
Okay. Do you think there are export controls that prevent funding of international students, like if they're not in the US?
Right. So there's a lot of issues that go into paying someone abroad. So there's legal issues. There are tax laws that you have to follow for that country. There are employment laws. From the HR side, there's a number of issues. So a lot of universities, they won't even do it, to be honest.
Okay, thank you.
So we have another question from Sukriti Khanna. If I don't have an SSN and start working on CPT, would extra tax be deducted?
Okay, so right now the Social Security office, they're actually not processing Social Security cards at the moment. They've closed their offices to the public. They have said that you could potentially mail in your original documents. However, I would not recommend you ever mail your original documents to someone. You actually can start working without a Social Security card. It's not required to start working, to be very honest with you. You do eventually need to apply for it once things go back to normal, and your employer does need that number for their tax reporting purposes. But someone on CPT, they could go ahead and start working, and no, they wouldn't have additional taxes or penalties because they don't have that.
Right. And Manvi has a question about this. So if someone who's graduating in 2022 or 2023, should they be worried about the elimination of OPT that there has been a lot of chatter about of late?
Maybe. I mean, I want to be realistic as well. There's a chance that OPT could go away. I don't want you to panic over it, but it could go away. But, you know, like I said, it's an election year. Depending on how this election goes, it may not be something to worry about. It's also possible if President Trump eliminated OPT in an executive order, that there would be lawsuits filed by judges and it would come back. So, you know, hopefully 2022, 23, things will be better, but, you know, we really don't know.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, and okay, this is another question that I also kind of had. A question from Priyanka asking if an education loan from India, if that would be considered for tax exemption while filing the taxes here.
No, that would have no bearing.
Mm-hmm. And another question. I'm staying with a relative in a different state due to the pandemic and working from home on my internship. My mailing address is in Michigan though. Will I have to file a tax this year in both states when I file next year?
So that is going to depend on, is it a CPT? Is this for a CPT or is this for your on-campus employment? Do you know?
Okay, CPT. You can probably unmute and ask your question if you have others also. On-campus employment, CPT internship is what this microphone isn't working.
Okay, so if it's your on-campus employment, then you need to check with your human resources. Typically, the rule is where you are working physically, that's where the tax obligation is. However, they may not know that you're working in that state. If you don't report that to your employer, they're just going to withhold tax according to the state that the employer is. So you want to follow up with your supervisor with that question.
Another question from Trisha. If I didn't have any income in 2019, would I still have to file the returns this year?
So if you didn't have any income in 2019, you won't file a tax return. However, if you were in the US in 2019, there is a form that you will file with the IRS called the 8843. And so you can, if you use Sprintax or Glacier at your school, then they would prepare that form for you. You can also find it on the IRS website. It's a very simple form. You could really just fill it out yourself and send it in. It's something that's technically required. Not everyone does it, but it is a requirement.
And a question from Param, will FAFSA be considered for tax exemption while filing tax?
Well, international students cannot qualify for FAFSA. So that's going to be federal funding, and it's something an F1 student couldn't do.
Anjali asks if she would be able to come to the US in case the university decides to go online for the first semester and then in order to be eligible for CPT. Okay, I think there are two questions here. One is if she would be able to come to the US, which I remember you saying that if the university has decided to go online, they won't be able to come to the United States. Correct?
That's correct.
And but they would
so in
still
that
be,
case, you could take classes from home, but you could not come to the US. You'd have to wait till they go back to face-to-face.
Right, but that would not have an effect on the CPT. That would still be considered one of the 2 semesters required for CPT.
Well, for the new students, according to the current rules, no. If you're a continuing student and this spring you went home, that is still classified as in person for the CPT rule. So okay. in her case, according to the current rules, it wouldn't technically qualify as the 2 semester, but it is something immigration is looking at, and they may change. And then it will depend on what her degree is in. So if her degree requires multiple internships, then there's a good chance she could still do it.
I hope that answers your question. Yeah. And also I missed a question that if you're supposed to file a tax return and then you don't file at all, what would happen?
Well, if you didn't file it, you can always go back and file for a previous year. Sprintax and Glacier, they will both prepare prior year tax returns for a fee. So it's better late than never. A lot of people, especially Indian students, you might get a refund. So it's also worth filing to get that money back. Failing to file a tax return can also potentially prevent you from a future H-1B, future green card. So definitely make sure you're meeting that filing requirement, even if it's late.
Right. We did not have any new questions here on the chat, but let me see if there are some from. Okay.
Oh, I see some. Let me see. I see the question, how many hours can a student work in summer? So that one at your university, you can actually work full time in the summer. A lot of universities, they may not allow you to go full-time because they may have to provide you benefits if you're full-time, but technically you can work full-time in the summer if your school will let you.
Okay. And also about the FAFSA question earlier, Param says he's a permanent resident. So.
Oh, okay. So you can do FAFSA if you're a PR.
Right. And another question, do we need to inform USCIS if we temporarily relocate?
You don't have to inform USCIS, but you should inform your DSO at your school. Now, your DSO is the one that does the I-20 for you. So let's say you've temporarily moved to another state. You do need to update your address. There's a requirement to update your address within 10 days of any move. So you definitely want to let your school know so they can put it in your CVIS record. And it's a good idea too to let them know if you've left the country.
And another question from Mahalakshmi I probably missed. Does a student earning from part-time jobs or RA or TA need to pay tax? I did, so I'm guessing yes.
Yes, so that would be employment and you would have income. So yes, you would need to file a tax return in that case.
Right. Okay, what did I miss? So does anyone else have any new questions? You can probably even unmute and ask your questions directly. Okay, another one. Do we need to pay tax on tuition waiver?
No, you do not.
Okay.
And even for scholarships, you only pay tax on it if your scholarship exceeds tuition and fees. So it's only those very large scholarships. And if your scholarship is coming from outside the country, then you never pay tax on that. So it's going to be very limited situations where scholarships would be taxable.
And what about PhD stipend? How is that taxed?
That's taxable as well. Any income that you have that comes from the US is considered taxable.
Right. Okay, another question from Sukriti. Would F1 students be allowed to work on work-study jobs?
No, so work-study jobs, you would have to file FAFSA. You'd have to be receiving federal aid from the government, and F1s aren't eligible for that. So work-study wouldn't be an option.
Okay. So we have a couple more questions. Okay. Anshul, could you had a couple of questions? Could you ask them, please?
So Trisha, you remember we shared a list of questions with you.
Right.
If you want to go through some of them, or do you think you have included most of them in your presentation already?
I think I have. Let me just look. No, I think I did get to those actually.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, yeah, and I remember another question that I saw but I haven't asked. So if someone has a really low tax return, would they be able to push it to next year and then take both of them together?
No, you have to file for each year separately. So no, definitely not.
Right.
Okay, and I mean, as a student from India, you do qualify for a tax treaty that gives you the standard deduction. The standard deduction is $12,000. So basically you're taking your total income and then you subtract $12,000 and then you only pay tax on what's remaining. So if somebody that, let's say you started school in the fall 2019, and you only worked from maybe September to December, and let's say you made less than $12,000, you're not even going to owe tax. So any tax that was deducted, you're going to get that all back as a refund. So our Indian students are in a really good position and many times get tax refunds. So don't be afraid to file your tax return. And like I said, a lot of times you're going to get money back.
There was another question. Is there any other software from which we can do the county or city taxes?
That's going to go in with your state tax. So on your W-2, there's going to be a box that shows what was deducted. And so when you use the softwares like Sprint Tax, you're just going to fill in all of those boxes and they'll do what you need to do for it.
And what's the timeline for people to expect their taxes, their returns to come back? And does using the Sprint or Glacier make these returns come any faster?
Okay, that's a really good question. So the IRS has actually temporarily stopped processing the paper-based tax returns. So as you know, the non-resident tax return, it is paper-based. So you're actually mailing in a paper tax return. Starting in, I believe, March, they just stopped processing that. Many people were made to work remotely at the IRS or maybe laid off, or they just didn't have the resources. And so you will see significant delays. At my school, the ones that filed quickly, the ones that filed in February, a lot of them got their refunds. But those that filed maybe mid-March onwards, a lot of those are still just pending. And we really don't have a timeline. Typically, it would be, I would say it's like 3 weeks up to 6 months in the worst case scenario. But in this year, it's going to be longer.
Okay. There was another question I had personally. So assuming that next semester, at least in Michigan, is both online as well as in person. And would I be able to say travel to India in the middle of the semester? Because I would ideally be able to take classes online as well, but then I am officially supposed to be in person here.
Well, and are you working? Do you have a grad assistantship?
Hopefully, but not now.
Okay, so with the employment piece, you're going to definitely want to check with your supervisor and human resources to see if they even allow it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not working, then you still, if your classes, if your university has gone back to in-person, then you still have that immigration rule where only one course can be online, and you're going to have to follow that. So if officially your university is back to normal face-to-face, then it could only be that one online class.
Another question from Priyanka. If the income is more than $12,000, would the tax deducted be flat or proportional to the tax based for international students, or would it be flat?
It's not flat. It's a graduated tax.
Right.
And then I saw a few other questions I think we missed. Let me see.
Yes, Sarthak had a question regarding the IRS with 88843. I'm not sure I understand that question properly. So, Sarthak, could you just ask that question?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Trisha, thank you very much for joining us today. So I just wanted to confirm that you just mentioned that we need to file 8843 for tax purposes. Like if we don't have any income in 2019, but we still need to file it?
So if you were here in 2019 and you had no income, you still file the form 8843. That one gets mailed to the IRS, and that's all you need to do. You don't need to do a federal tax return. You don't need to do a state tax return. You just fill out that document and send it in.
Okay, so that's only the single document.
Right.
Got it. Thank you.
Right. Another question, do we have to pay taxes if our wage is below the minimum?
Okay, so if you're from India and your income is below $12,000, you're actually not going to pay any tax. Now, your payroll office, they're going to be withholding tax from your paycheck. But when you file your tax return, if your total income was below $12,000, you'll get all of that back as a refund.
Right. So we do have to file, but then we would be getting the refund on that.
Right.
And okay, this is an interesting question. So if we have a part-time job, an internship, or a full-time job under CPT, OPT, or H-1B, would the income we receive be taxed under the US tax laws or according to the country of our citizenship?
So when you're F1, even CPT, OPT, if you're within those first 5 years, you file as non-resident. And so you're only reporting US income. Then H-1B, or if you've been here over 5 years, that's when you file the resident tax return. And yeah, that's how you're going to file.
Okay.
Was there another question on that one, or? I think that was it. And then it's only when you file the resident tax return that you even report income made from abroad. Residents have to report worldwide income, but non-residents only report US income.
Right. Right. And okay, a question from Anmol that as a PhD student funded by the university, what are the regulations for traveling to India and or traveling overseas for academic or business purposes or conferences?
So with the IRS, when you get money, they really ask, why are you getting money? So in the case of traveling for business purposes, traveling for a conference, let's say you have a job, maybe you're on your OPT, CPT, your company tells you, okay, you need to go abroad. We're gonna pay for the airline. We're gonna pay all the money to go do this training, to do this conference. We need you to do this as part of your employment, as part of your job. In that case, it's not taxable because it's done for the purpose of your job, for your employer. It benefits the employer more than it really benefits you. However, let's say maybe you're a student, there's a conference that you want to go to because it benefits you. It's good networking for you. It's something that's really benefiting you, the individual. Then technically, yes, that money you received to travel would be taxable. So it's really a question of what's the purpose of the travel.
Right. Yeah, an extension to that question, would I need to inform school if I'm going home for a few weeks about the immigration issues? Or?
Sure. So if you're traveling out of the country, you need a signature on your I-20. That signature, it's on the second page, and it needs to be from within the last 6 months. I know the I-20 says the signature is good for a year, but realistically, the officers at the airport, they're going to check that it's within 6 months. So I would definitely contact your international office, get that new signature. Also, with the way things have been lately with travel, you always want to let them know when you're leaving. In case the rules have changed, they may be able to give you more information that you need. So yes, I would let them know.
Right. Okay, 1 second. Okay. I think we went over this, but you could probably give a summary on this too. For a student filing taxes for the first time, could you give an overview of forms I would need to file my returns in a general case scenario?
So a typical case, let's say you did an on-campus job, maybe you worked in dining services, then you would need to get a form called the W-2. And that is a form that's going to show how much money you made. It's going to show how much money was deducted in taxes. You're going to take that W-2 and then you're going to use it to prepare your tax return. Now, I'm guessing University of Michigan, Michigan State, you probably use something like Sprintax or Glacier. Is that correct?
Yes.
So your school has provided that resource, and you're going to, create your record using either Sprintax, Glacier. Those are the non-resident tax prep softwares. You're going to answer some questions about your immigration status. You're going to fill in the information from your W-2, and then it will automatically prepare your tax return. So the tax return form is called the 1040-NR. That's one. And then there's also the 1040-NR-EZ. Those are the two different tax returns. The 1040-NR-EZ is the simple version. So if you've worked, you don't have anything complicated, that's the tax return you have. If your situation is a little more complicated, that maybe you invested in the stock market, maybe you had contributed to a charity, you have a little more complicated things, that's when you have the 1040-NR. Then you'll also file that 8843 form that we talked about. Both Glacier and Sprintax will automatically prepare that for you, and you'll just mail it in with your tax return. Okay, that's the federal one. You'll also do a state one. Sprintax can do the state ones, so it's the similar process, and then you'll just mail that to the state tax authority. So when you use either Sprintax or Glacier, it's very simple. It's very easy. And then the last piece where you're actually filing is by mailing it. So there's no electronic filing when you're non-resident.
And in the Glacier tax prep portal, what is the country of tax residence, since there is no option to select US?
It's going to be the country that you are a citizen of. Your home country, basically.
Right. And do I need to file 8843 if I'm already filing 1040-NR?
Yes, you'll file them together.
Great. And Rujuta has a question. So we only have to file state and federal tax. What about the local tax? Is there, okay, yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, you'll do your state tax. And I see another one. Let's see, I was earning by doing on-campus jobs while filing federal taxes. The site mentions we must post the form to a US address. Yes, so after you prepare your tax return, whether it's through Glacier or Sprintax, you will actually print out that physical copy and you will sign it and mail it in. You're not finished filing until you've actually mailed it.
And all right. I was just wondering because I'm in India currently, so I wasn't sure about it.
And you can mail it from India. You can file from abroad.
All right. Thank you. And what about the local tax? Do we have to file that or not?
You'll do a state tax return.
Okay, that would be included in that?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And yeah, I guess you should be getting late by now. So it's already past 1 hour, but we can take 1 or 2 more questions if that's okay with you.
Yeah, we can do a couple more. And then I guess if people have additional questions, do you want them to submit it to you guys and then you get them to me?
Yeah, that should be fine.
That as
We
well.
could do that. We could do that. So we'll just take the last two questions and then wrap things up for today.
Okay.
So, okay, does Glacier generate both 8843 and the 1040 NR for me?
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't see any other question here.
Okay.
So any last, okay, we have one last question. Anyone up for that? Okay, I don't think so. So in case y'all have any questions, I'll create a Drive link and then I'll just put it. You can just put your questions on that and then we'll forward that to Trisha.
Okay, great, sounds good.
And thank you so much for taking the time and effort to do this. It was very helpful for me personally as well. And
I just saw another question. The question about if you have earnings on a bank account, that's not taxable. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So I'm just putting the Drive link here, the doc link here, and then people can just put in questions. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I put it in a private chat. Right. Then I would have to give certain permissions. I'll do that, but I think we are good to go. And then thank you once again, and thank you, Bharatiyam, for helping us organize this. Thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this. And good afternoon or good night, depending on where you are.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Trisha, for doing this.
Thank you so
we
much.
really appreciate this.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. So stay safe, take care, and see you soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.